we were taught that the point of communication, just like the point of everything else, is to somehow get to the future. And so the opportunity isn't in this moment. The opportunity is in getting what I want. And so that becomes the point of communication. And this isn't the point of communication at all. Communication is to understand a depth of this moment. Communication is to expose a deeper sincerity about what is real and true, which can also be about what is practical, what is helpful. And when we confuse the point of communication, when we are afraid of not getting what we want, then we miss entirely the real opportunity. I'm quite enthusiastic about this title today, Tactful and Honest Communication Skills. And that is a relational difficulty, which is perceived to be a difficulty about other people not listening, other people not doing what we want them to do, people being confrontational. But really what it is, upon further investigation, in most cases, is a difficulty in communicating, where we are not communicating effectively in a way that allows for a genuine connection to be made. And this is really fascinating, as with a lot of skills or abilities, before we develop them, we can assume that the way we go about things is just the way to go about things, often assuming that there isn't a growth opportunity, and what would fix it is somebody else being different. So it's like the problem is out there rather than the problem is I need to develop my communication ability. And so often, as it relates to us as human beings, we don't often want to see or notice that the issue isn't out there, that the issue is somewhere in us, which is predominantly entangled in the fear that we have. And the fear that we have makes it difficult to function in a peaceful and coherent way. During our time together during this session, my intention is to bring clarity to that difficulty as it relates to communication, expressing honesty and sincerity, and maybe being open to more tactful ways of communicating that lead to beautiful outcomes, even though those outcomes might not mean you get what you want. The fundamental difficulty that we have in communicating and expressing ourselves and being tactful is that we're just so damn scared. And when we are scared, when we are with fear, we're simply not interested in genuine connection. And I really invite you to see this because it's monumental. It really is monumental to see that fear is the issue here, and we're invited to deal with the fear rather than looking for ways to get around the fear, which is often what happens when it comes to developing skills, in the way that we're looking for how we can manipulate other people rather than genuinely connecting with other people and discovering a win-win outcome. Notice this, though, about the difficulty in communicating while being afraid. And afraid of what? Ultimately, the fear is I might not get what I want. There's this assumption that in the future is an outcome that I need in order to be whole, in order to be complete, in order to be at peace. And this person that I'm communicating with is in the way. And in order for me to get what I want, I need them to do what I want them to do, essentially. Do you see the setup here? The priority is for me to get what I want. And if it looks like I might not get what I want, then I get agitated, I get scared, I get stressed, I get frustrated. And in that agitation, I start resorting to aggressive forms of communication, which include outbursts, demands, ultimatums, threats, I'll love you if kind of language, which is all a form of manipulation. I'm going to withhold from you what I think you want, even to the degree of respect and kindness, unless you give me what I want. And we'll say, yeah, connection sounds wonderful and great, but give me what I want and then I'll connect with you. Give me what I want and then I'll be open to honoring you and your experience, which isn't genuine connection at all because it's predicated on the other person not being genuine. It's predicated on you being how I want you to be, then I'll connect with you. That's not connection. Real connection can only happen when there's an honoring of sovereignty on both sides, meaning that there is a great allowing for the other person to be the other person, for the other person to see how they see, follow their own inner guidance. Really what it is it's releasing the other person, which also comes with recognizing that you don't really know what's best for the other person. Do you see the drastic contrast in how we've been taught or conditioned to communicate? We've been taught forms of communication which are ultimately manipulative, and we've been taught this in an indirect way with how other people have treated us, meaning other people have ultimately said, be how I want you to be, and then I'll accept you. We were taught that the point of communication, just like the point of everything else, is to somehow get to the future. And so the opportunity isn't in this moment. The opportunity is in getting what I want. And so that becomes the point of communication. And this isn't the point of communication at all. Communication is to understand a depth of this moment, expose a deeper sincerity about what is real and true, which can also be about what is practical, what is helpful. And when we confuse the point of communication, when we are afraid of not getting what we want, then we miss entirely the real opportunity. I'm even hesitant to go into these things publicly, like in a way that's not in a private conversation that deals with the fear, because if there is still fear, then often what happens is we try and use these skills in a fearful way. We interpret these skills as a means of getting what you want in the future rather than a means of genuine connection. What is it to be tactful? And this is such a great thing to explore, because in the adorableness of people explaining to me their social or relational difficulties, and in the most adorable way, there's zero tactfulness. We just say whatever we're conditioned to say. We don't give consideration to understanding where the other person is coming from. We assume we know. We don't articulate in a way that honors the other person's experience. We are on a very direct and narrow path that is simply trying to get what we want. And then we wonder why it's not working. We wonder why people seem confrontational. We wonder why it seems like people are ignoring us. In a beautiful way, we can recognize that from a human dynamic standpoint, if people do not feel seen or heard, there's a wall that goes up. It's a protection mechanism that has been developed over years of not understanding themselves. And in that lack of self-understanding, trying to navigate in the world, we put up these unnecessary walls that make it difficult to understand what people are saying. These are completely unconscious walls. We're not aware that they're there. And so learning how to use language in a tactful way that helps other people feel seen and heard can help reduce the size of these walls so that you can at least look at each other eye to eye over the fence. Even though there still might be a fence there, we can bring it down a little bit so that we can at least see each other. And there's not an expectation to completely remove the wall. There's just an invitation to see each other more clearly. To be tactful is a particular skill set necessary in sensitive or potentially offensive situations. Being able to honor the other person's experience. And as I mentioned earlier, to honor someone else's experience is to really let go of them. You don't need them to do anything in order for you to be at peace. And if you're in that state, it's better to just not communicate right now. You need to be in your own space and clarify your own confusion, sort of come back to center before you start demanding that somebody else not be somebody else so that you can be free. Begin and end with expressing appreciation for someone's time and energy. Might not seem that important, but I find it to be very powerful, not only for the connection, but also for myself, which is as I'm about to communicate something, which often comes with asking for attention, can I express an appreciation for their time and attention? There's not a perfect sentence to say, and I feel you will find the appropriate words if it's genuine. And this is also important, that is genuine, which speaks back to not using these methods simply as tools of manipulating, but to genuinely recognize that you're asking for someone's time and attention. And maybe as an example, and I went through this with somebody on Zoom just the other day, they're managing a team. They were about to send a very frustrating email to a superior and sent me the email first for me to see it. And then I essentially rewrote the email for them. Starting out with, thank you for your consideration. Here's what I'm dealing with, rather than going straight into whatever you think the issue is, like dumping it on somebody. Before you start trying to unload on another or demand for somebody's attention, see if you can communicate an appreciation for them even considering reading what's coming next or listening to what's coming next. And then likewise, when you're done, thank them again. And as I say these, it's like, well, maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal in contrast to just unloading on someone or just automatically demanding something or asking for something, because you don't know what space that other person might be in when they receive that message or your words. And so starting with a note of appreciation can really help ground the energy of the interaction. And if you've been listening to this program for quite some time, you recognize how I'm such a big proponent on, in some way or another, recognizing that what you see is what you see, and what you see is not the way things are. And so often we assume that the way we see things is the way things are, which comes with an expectation that other people should see it as well. Share your experience rather than proclaiming that your experience is reality for everyone. How often do we do that? When we communicate, when we talk as if the way we see things is the way things are, kind of like demanding somebody else should see it that way too. For example, you could say something like, what I see happening, and I could be missing something, is that XYZ is happening and it appears to be creating XYZ problem. Do you see the same? Rather than, this is what's happening and it's a problem. There's something magical in the openness in what I see happening and I might be missing something. Because isn't that true? Because again, this is also about communicating honestly rather than assuming things that are true that you don't really know are true. What I see happening, and I could be missing something, is that XYZ is happening and it appears to be creating XYZ problem. Do you see this also? That invites someone into your world of what you see, looking for common ground rather than demanding that they see what you see, which is often what we do. What also makes communicating difficult is that we are fundamentally afraid to be honest. We're afraid to express what we really feel, what we really see, because we lose an element of imaginary control. There's a fundamental fear in being honest because essentially you don't know what's going to happen. And so we use degrees of dishonesty to control what happens. And playfully, this is ugly to look at, but it's important to see. Because in order to be honest, you have to let reality be reality, which is people will respond how they're going to respond, which means you might not get what you want in the future. And this is why we feel like it's not safe to be honest. And so instead, we withhold honesty as a way of controlling outcome, which is really interesting because then we're just living inauthentically. And this is why it's so important to develop this skill to communicate honestly and tactfully, because it allows you to live more authentically. It allows you to honor what is sincere and true in yourself. For example, in relationship dynamic, let's say that you want to express how something makes you feel when somebody does XYZ, or there's a project behind schedule, other people might be slacking, and on and on and on. And so there's an honesty that wants to be communicated, but we're afraid because they might misinterpret, or they might quit, or whatever, 1,000 different things. But it's important to communicate what's honest in this situation. What I tend to do in situations like this that I find to be incredibly tactful is first to understand a dynamic about human beings, which is human beings are incredibly prone to take things personally. Meaning, if you were to express honesty about your own experience, somebody else might take it personally and freak out. And that's not what you're going for. You're just trying to share what's sincere and honest. I would preface the conversation in a way that goes something like this. Hey, do you have a moment? There are some things that I'm thinking about that I would like to share for the sake of my own sanity, to just get them out so that they can be seen. And it might sound like it's about you, but it's not. It's just me trying to understand myself. Do you have time and space to hear that right now? And this does a few things. It's valuing somebody else's time and attention. And when their attention and time is perceived as valuable, then they enjoy sharing it. It perceives them as being helpful, and it's disarming in the way that they don't have to worry about it being personal, because it's not. You've clarified that. This is also only applicable if you can see that it's also not personal, that it's not really about them, that your issue is your issue. And I love this phrase of sharing for the sake of my own sanity. You ever notice how helpful that is to communicate things so that you can see what's going on, right? To sit and talk with someone, to get ideas out, articulate and verbalize your inner world so that you can see it more clearly. And that's incredibly helpful. And it's even more helpful when there's somebody else there that's looking at it with you in a non-defensive, non-personal space. It can be very productive. And so to communicate that beforehand, that I need to say some honest things, or I'm going to freak out because this wants to come out, would you be open to holding space for that? I find that incredibly disarming. Rather than frantically saying what you feel like you have to say, which comes across as very personal, and then the other person becomes defensive and doesn't listen. Do you see what I'm kind of pointing to here as it relates to tactful and honest communication skills? Because again, I'm encouraging you to recognize that, oh my goodness, there's a whole other way of communicating, one that includes a lot less fear and allows me to communicate more effectively. And I invite you to recognize this in your relational life. That is the difficulty other people, or is the difficulty that I'm not communicating effectively? I'm communicating from a place of fear, and then I'm blaming it on others. And to see that kind of opens you up to growing in your ability to communicate. Take ownership of your own emotional experience and be honest about the difficulty you are having in dealing with yourself, rather than blaming them or others for your internal experience. We can be engaged in some sort of situation, professionally or personally, where we are trying to make progress on something that involves other people and we're frustrated. And in communicating that, we can communicate it in such a way that blames your internal experience on other people and demands that other people should change in order for there to be progress. Rather than communicating, I am having difficulty getting us to work together as a team, rather than other people are being difficult. Do you see how that just relinquishes all your power, right? Saying that there's no chance for this to work out unless other people get their shit together. When really, if it's not working out, and especially if I'm in some particular leadership role, which you always are, whether you realize it or not, I'm the one that is having the difficult time, because I would like to see us work together. I would like to see us reach this goal together. And so the opportunity is for me to communicate more efficiently. That becomes the question, not how can other people change? how can I communicate more effectively? How can I understand more deeply what the real issue is here? This difficulty is an opportunity for me to grow, rather than this difficulty is arising because other people. Practically speaking and professionally speaking, this is a huge difference maker in how people are compensated in the workplace. And what I mean by that is there's a situation that arises, a conflict, a dilemma, and the person that makes the big bucks sees this as an opportunity for growth, for more clarity, for deeper connection, for making progress. And the person that doesn't make the big bucks sees this as a problem, and they just want to give it to the person who makes the big bucks because they're able to take this and turn it into an opportunity. And this is so self-evident, and I'm speaking in generalities, and maybe not even necessarily to be compensated in your work, but to be compensated from life in the way of receiving value. If life presents difficulties or conflicts, and you're able to turn those into opportunities, you are creating more value. And the more value you create, the more value you receive. And this is one of those skill sets, generally speaking, that is worthy of development, which is looking through the lens of opportunity rather than through the lens of problems. That no matter what arises, it's an opportunity to see beyond it, rather than avoiding what arises and hoping that somebody else takes care of it. And you can see this practically speaking just in the quality of our human lives, that if quote unquote problems arise and you see them as problems, you don't make very much progress. But if quote unquote problems arise and you perceive them as opportunities, adventures, then you look at them. And when you look at them, you discover things you didn't see before. You discover opportunities inside of opportunities because you're looking at them. But to perceive them as problems, you ultimately say, I don't want to look at this. And because you don't look at it, you don't see opportunities, which means you don't grow. Let's see if there's any questions that arise from the live audience here. And maybe I can speak to those. And if not, then we will wrap up here soon with the guided meditation. And yeah, there's just, I mean, even as I sit here, there's so many things to explore around this. There's so many subtleties that we're not aware of that, if seen, could just add more ease and grace to the play of communicating and just the play of being human, which is also the nature of this show, to pull back the curtain and see what's going on. Comment comes in, what happens if the people you are interacting with have personality disorders? That's an interesting question, partly because I don't know where it's coming from as you write it, because a lot of the difficulties we have simply stem from how we see other people. And if you see other people as having personality disorders and what you think that means and what you think that is, that can become a filter that doesn't really see people clearly. And again, not knowing what's giving rise to the words you're choosing to use, I don't interpret other people as having personality disorders, as in something's wrong with them, as in they're not functioning properly. I think everyone is operating perfectly according to their life path. Everyone is operating appropriately given their individual journey, meaning that everyone is right where they're supposed to be. So they're perfect in that way. And so when I see them, I see wholeness. And you can see all the blocks that might arise in the perception of seeing someone as disordered. There's an invitation to be cautious in how you perceive others, especially with the labels that we tend to use as a society, because those labels we tend to use can just be filters that we can use to blame other people for being difficult. If I am still under the assumption that what's important is getting what I want, and I see that other person is in the way, then that is a perfect doorway for hurling labels that diminish the other person. Maybe if the question speaks to people who are difficult, I would also recognize I'm the one having difficulty. Do you notice this? This is hilarious. To say that I'm dealing with a difficult person is almost like saying they're difficult, but I'm the one experiencing difficulty. So where is the difficulty? And mostly what we're going to find is the person who's being difficult is being difficult because they're not giving me what I want. If I don't want anything as it relates to me being at peace and feeling whole and complete, then what's the difficulty? And then maybe practically speaking, if it's in a work setting and dealing with difficult people, what I would do is just be profoundly honest about the difficulty that I'm having. Not that you're difficult, but hey, I'm having a really difficult time communicating and understanding you. Do you see how beautiful this is? It's not your being difficult. I'm experiencing difficulty in understanding you. Will you please help me? And again, the way that you communicate these things, you can either invite a defensiveness or you can invite an openness. And the more you blame, especially to blame the difficulty you're having on the other person, that's only going to create walls. But to disarm the situation and say, I'm having difficulty, this is my issue, and it's not your fault, but I'm having difficulty, would you please help me? It's a completely different dynamic, and you bring a completely different energy to the table. Sunny says, and I've tried in so many different and kind ways. He speaks rudely. Often I don't of my dad. I'm not getting anywhere. Man, I don't understand what you're saying there. Other than my dad speaks rudely to me. And I'm not making progress. There's a fundamental confusion in what you're saying, and I can't necessarily proclaim that you believe what you're saying, but it's possible that you believe in what you're saying, which is why you're saying it, which is to say that he speaks to me rudely, which is taking how he speaks personally, that he's speaking rudely to you rather than he's speaking in a way that can be interpreted as rudely. And you're the one that interprets rudely, and you experience your interpretation of rudely. In the same way, it can be perceived entirely differently and thus have a different experience. Whether this person or another person is speaking in a way that you interpret as rude, if you take it personally, you will put up a wall to protect yourself. But I wonder if you can see that they are not being rude to you, but rather they are simply talking in a way that mirrors the way they talk to themselves. This is really important to see, which is to see that how they're talking in the space you share has nothing to do with you. And the more you think it has something to do with you, the more of a difficulty you're going to have. What makes communicating with other people typically challenging is that other people take things personally. Likewise, what's going to make communicating very difficult for you is taking things personally. And the follow-up comment of, I want to be spoken to respectfully, I think that this is an area worth a lot of investigation, because wanting to be spoken to respectfully is going to be a big wall that prevents genuine connection. It's essentially saying, speak to me in the way that I want to be spoken to first, and then I'll be open to connecting with you. And there's a profound freedom in recognizing that regardless of how someone appears to be speaking to you, they're not speaking to you. So whether they're speaking to you respectfully or disrespectfully, it's not about you. And if it's not about you, why would you even want them to speak to you respectfully? This also goes back to honoring other people where they are in their journey. This goes back to releasing them and not wanting anything from them. Now, if we are compassionately emotionally fragile and we take things personally and offensively all the time, then there's some work we got to do in clarifying our own misunderstandings so that we can be better prepared to deal with social interaction in a more productive way, rather than demanding that the world be different and talk to you in a way that you want to be talked to, because that's just not reality. That's trying to make everyone else your prisoner, which is not letting people be free. And so there's a way of going about this where other people can be free to be other people, and you can still maintain a semblance of inner peace regardless of how other people talk to you. This is recognizing your own inherent sovereignty and power. Yeah, and like you say there, Sonny, yes, I sat with it afterwards and tried to work out why I got or always get so triggered. And yeah, do you see that as you explore that, you realize it's not about other people? It's about your own issue, and it points to the inner work to be done, and it doesn't point to the work that other people need to be doing. If you're having the difficulty, you're the one having the difficulty. It's not other people being difficult. So much to explore, and my goodness, such a beautiful opportunity. And I feel playfully disappointed that I couldn't say all the things I wanted to say about this, but there's just so much, and it's often so unique given people's independent experiences, like what their fears are and what their hangups are. And so I really like diving into this on an individual basis, which I spend a lot of time doing. But yeah, let's wrap it up there and just kind of end with the meditation. But I do want to encourage you to join the Enlight Connect free community, and you can watch these live and watch the recordings and participate in other discussions and other free content. You can learn about that on enlightconnect.com. In the menu, there's something that says community. You can click on that and apply. And if you're in a position to really dive into these things, I guess I would playfully invite you to look into the opportunity of you and I working together and diving into this. I know that's not for everyone and it's not an option for a lot of people, but maybe it's an option for you. We could potentially explore that. But it's such a great joy of mine to dive into this one-on-one with people over an extended period of time and really unravel these confusions and find more tactful and honest ways to communicate, which can just be such a transformation in how we relate to ourselves in the world and make for a much more smooth experience and joyful experience and beautiful experience. Let's do the meditation, and then we will continue on in our day. We're going to take a moment to connect with the present moment, express a bit of gratitude for whatever has been discovered that allows us to live with more love, compassion, and freedom. And maybe just share an attitude of honoring for life and all human beings, including ourselves. Honoring the miracle we find ourselves in, even though at times we might not understand it. So let's just be here for a short moment together and allow ourselves to ground into this moment. And somewhere from the heart, there can be a whisper that says, "Thank you." There's so much that has been discovered, and there's so much more to discover. in life is simply waiting for our availability, for our openness to show up and listen. So let's drop more and more deeply into this moment with an open heart that communicates to life. We're ready to dive more deeply and discover new ways that we can connect with love, compassion, and freedom. We're going to take 3 deep breaths. And in that breath, we're going to just allow ourselves to release the fears, release the tensions, release the anxieties, and just be more and more present. Let's breathe. Let's appreciate the stillness. And this same stillness has always been there, and it always will be there. It waits patiently for us to come home and check in when it's time to check in. Thanks for meditating with me today.